In this video we're going to look at the Grenfell fire, one of the worst disasters to ever happen in London, and why there's been no justice.
72 people, 18 children burned to death. That wasn't an accident. There are people to blame, and 5 years on from the phase 1 of the inquiry, there still are people living in buildings just like this, and Grenfell 2 is waiting to happen.
It's been 8 years since the Grenfell fire happened on June 14th, 2017, a day that most of us who lived in London will never forget. Yet justice has not been served for the people in that fire. At the time of making this video, there's still an ongoing inquiry and no one has yet been held accountable for this absolute tragedy, which by all accounts was fully preventable. And I'm making this video as a tribute to everyone that was in the fire, and because we can't let the story be covered up. To everyone who lost their home, their lives, their family or friends, to all the firefighters, many of whom went on to get cancer. And let's start by asking, if this had happened to the home of someone wealthy, and the cause was known to be shoddy workmanship, using flammable materials, do you think the people responsible would get away with it? But the people whose lives have been so badly damaged by this incident have been treated appallingly, and their ability to do anything about it was out of their hands.
Politicians for the last 7 years have fobbed us off. We were an abandoned community. We were fractured. But what are we now? We're a family. Look at us. We've been here for 7 years. We're walking. We're not going to stop.
In case you're unaware of the story, a man was woken up at nearly 1 in the morning by a fire in his kitchen caused by an electrical fault on a hot point fridge freezer.
Fire brigade?
Yeah, hello, hi, in the fire, flat 16 Grenfell Tower.
Sorry, a fire where?
Flat 16 Grenfell Tower.
In no way was that man responsible for the fire. The building had recently gone through a regeneration refurbishment, and issues with power surges caused by the construction work had been documented by a community group. Early media reports had tried to suggest that this man going through his own trauma was responsible for the blaze, and those that were responsible hid away and refused to talk to the press. And we can see from this real-time footage that in less than 20 minutes, the fire had travelled to the outside of the building and spread, causing a huge inferno that ended up burning for 60 hours. Everyone saw the footage of the recently applied cladding, which was burning, melting, exploding, and spewing toxic fumes into the atmosphere. It was a sight of horror. And the London Fire Brigade, who for years had had their resources and finances cut under a failed political agenda called austerity, even with 40 fire engines and the combined efforts of every London Borough's brigade, the blaze was too overpowering for them to deal with. They were not given a plan to the building. There was no emergency lighting, and the only stairwell was filled with toxic smoke, because it was acting like a chimney, and they were next to be blamed.
TMO, the MD from the TMO, has got the plans on his phone, and he was looking to ping them through to somebody. So,
for what it's worth, I've got a picture from the BA control of the layout of a standard floor, but also we know which numbers the flats are.
Sending it on a phone is no good for me. So, and I hate to say this, and please don't record this in the minutes, but having experienced the back end of the Lackenow inquiry, having been in charge of other major incidents, I'm telling you now that the fact you have not been able to get me a set of plans, actually as a set of plans, is a major deficiency.
The London Fire Brigade had already warned all 33 boroughs in London that putting cladding on the outside of tower blocks was a bad idea, and told them of potential risks, but were ignored.
I looked up to the right and could see the building was on fire, but it was really only mainly on one side. We had people we love in there calling for help and begging us to help them. Saw a family waving a white towel out of the window for about an hour and a half. Really, we sat and watched them die in front of our eyes. We saw the fire climb across the building towards them, and we saw them stop moving. We saw the fire envelop the flat that they were in, and then we saw it rendered ash. I have a friend that was on the 15th floor who survived and managed to escape. When he was coming down the stairs, he was falling over corpses, stepping over corpses, and he eventually made it to the 3rd floor where he fainted and was rescued by the firemen. A friend of mine, Yasin al-Wahabi, it seems that he hasn't made it, and that's someone that's loved by many people. We are literally discovering every hour more and more people that are missing and that haven't made it. We should really look at people going to prison for this, because this is criminal, and it didn't have to happen, and people didn't have to die.
In the days that followed, people were ignored by authorities and left to their own devices. It was local people and communities that did everything they could to help people, whilst the government and local council did nothing.
David Kerry was Kensington and Chelsea's emergency planner, but just a few hours after the fire started, the borough's emergency control centre wasn't up and running because of this lost key.
The answer was just simply nobody could find it, nobody knew why it wasn't there.
But I mean, most people would regard that as hopeless.
I can only tell you we put in what we thought was the appropriate security system with the security staff, and I can only tell you that, very unfortunately, that key was not there at the time it was needed.
Many people were still missing or unaccounted for, and they had lost everything. They had nowhere to wash or no clothes to change into. There was no official help from one of the richest boroughs in one of the richest cities in the world. After 2 days, people had had enough, and they gathered outside the local council office in nearby Kensington.
So many families have been destroyed, innocent children have died, pregnant mothers, families have been ripped to pieces in a matter of a day. Everything has crumbled. So much children dying like that. People being burnt alive in 2017. Come on, it's not right.
All they do is cut corners and cut costs and leave us hanging. When a tragedy like this happens, no one's out to explain or to show us or to help. No support whatsoever. I mean, the day of when it happened, everyone was down there on their own initiatives. No authority, poverty come down, no one come to help. Apart from the firemen, bless them, working their hearts out, and the police trying, and that was about it.
That's what it took to get an official response. The then Prime Minister, Theresa May, came to the scene and was booed. She didn't stop to speak to a single resident. This was all happening in front of our eyes on the news. Although we were witnessing it in real time, it takes the inquiry for the officials to be properly scrutinised and for the truth about their incompetence and arrogance to really come out.
Volunteers and charity workers helping those who'd lost loved ones and their homes in the Grenfell fire.
I swear, according to the Sunday Good Cause.
Rupinder Hardy was part of the official response, coming from neighbouring Ealing Council to help struggling Kensington and Chelsea.
Please sit down and make yourself comfortable.
Her first impression was one of shock at the state of the main rescue centre, the Westway.
It felt more like a crime scene than somewhere where you would actually actively want bereaved survivors and residents to come in to seek help. It didn't invite people in. This is a police crime scene. That was the first impression I had.
She also found it dirty, with overflowing bins.
That weekend, it was in the 30s. It was very hot, very sunny. Even with bins overflowing, you'd have the smell, you'd have vermin, you'd have flies. Within the rest centre, obviously Westway Sports Centre, it was still hot as well. The changing rooms and the toilets, we asked for them to be cleaned as well.
Together with her colleague Philip Lee Morris, they restored order to the rescue centre. But she was shocked to hear that some Kensington and Chelsea council staff swore at the victims, evidence that was read out at the inquiry.
Reported that some of the housing staff were heard telling victims.
I just don't understand the need for that. There was absolutely, we were all there, supposedly, trying to do the right thing and the only thing to support bereaved survivors and residents that presented to the Westway. It was absolutely uncalled for.
In the months and years leading up to the tragedy, warnings about the inevitable disaster were posted on a blog which still exists called the Grenfell Action Group, questioning why there was only one fire exit on a block of 24 floors and there was no building fire alarm system.
They wrote, only a catastrophic event, a serious loss of life of residents will expose the ineptitude and incompetence of the TMO, and that it won't be long before the words of this blog come back to haunt them.
The council outsourced the management responsibility of the building to an operation called the TMO, making it harder for them to be directly accountable. They didn't just ignore the blog, they threatened them with legal action, and they were not aware that a dangerously flammable material was about to be applied to their homes because that information was kept from them. If Claire Williams, the woman employed by the TMO and was overseeing the Grenfell project, had listened to these people and acted responsibly, which could have prevented this tragedy from occurring. But instead she put a stop to open meetings and switched to presentations in a show flat with representatives from the building firm, which was only responsible for the refurbishment and not the pre-existing issues. The residents were prevented from communicating, and this has all come to light in the many hours of inquiry questioning. And one reason why it is so long, because often they have to be asked a question over and over before a straight answer is given. And it's hard to find one person who shows regret for their actions or thinks they did anything wrong. But what's become clear is many of the people that were involved in this decision making did know that this product was flammable, and they've done their best behind the scenes to destroy evidence or develop memory loss.
You are ultimately responsible for a failure to keep these documents up to date lower down in your organisation.
Pass.
Pass?
Well, what I'm saying, I think I've answered once, twice, 3, 4 times, and that's it, really.
I binned all of them but the last one.
Then you said you binned them, is that right?
I didn't keep them.
Well, what did you do with them?
I think if the police didn't take them, I binned them.
You binned them, even though you knew by that time that there was going to be, or was already on foot, a public inquiry?
I believe I looked at them and they were notes.
Did you ever inform the Metropolitan Police that you had destroyed documents which were relevant to their investigation?
No, I didn't.
Why's that?
Because it's not occurred to me. Today is the first time that I've ever really had a conversation about this.
They knew there were issues with fire safety. There's email evidence that fires like this could and had occurred. They either hoped it wouldn't happen to them or they just didn't care.
They didn't treat us with respect or humanity or empathy. And if they had done, we wouldn't be sitting here now. And I thank you for the work you're doing. But what's really, really important is that the culture of the KCTMO, the lack of scrutiny by RBKC is believed, I believe many residents believe, is a causative factor of what happened on the night of the fire and what led to the fire. And I just ask you that you bear that in mind.
The corporate culture he's referring to is evident in the testimonies given at this years-long inquiry, which has already cost millions of pounds. I've sat through hours of footage, and they go to the greatest length explaining and denying. I find it incredible that I found a clip of a man who knew the insulation could burst into flames, even though they claimed they did not.
3.5 months ago, I was watching them coming in with the insulation, and I said to one of the workers, "What are you doing with this insulation? Why are you putting it in the building?" He says, "Oh, it's to keep you cool in the summer and to keep you warm in the winter." And I said, "Is it?" And I says, "Watch this." And I broke off a little piece of it, yeah? I put it on the back of my phone, and then after I put it on the back of my phone, I lit it with my lighter, and I watched that little piece of phone go psst. And I says, "You're putting that in this building, yeah?"
Would you want your home wrapped in a flammable product? Did one person who signed off on the approvals ask themselves that question? Their job was to sign off on approving changing the appearance of the tower, and they failed to meet the tenants' needs. They were concerned that they were going to overspend on the budget to improve the look of the building as part of a deal they'd made for selling the land beneath the tower for £129 million to a private company who didn't like the look of the tower block. Their economic decisions turned what was already a dangerous building into a death trap. They had a budget to make that building look more attractive to the new owners as part of their deal. They'd already used up that budget, so they needed to cut costs. So they asked their contractors for the cheapest option. And yet no one involved in the decision-making process has admitted liability. Instead of being transparent, they've admitted to destroying evidence. They've had an attitude at the inquiry while being questioned and acted like they've done nothing wrong. And regardless of the regulations and what tests were done, the product, the cladding, is made from byproducts of fuel, which the people selling it knew, quote, "It goes up like effing paraffin." It was made from a composite that was flammable, and the insulation was combustible, but everyone involved just wanted a contract. Arconic, who produced the cladding, a US company where the product is banned as it is in other countries, refused to attend the inquiry. In a separate case held at the High Court, they had agreed to a settlement payment with more than 900 people and had also agreed to contribute to a restorative justice project to benefit the community affected by the fire. Sounds like they were liable, but did not want to face the scrutiny that comes with being in a public inquiry. A director of the sales team in the UK accused them of corporate manslaughter. In a meeting with his former head of sales, Deborah French, minutes of which have been published by the police, she sold this product for a living. She knew building fires had been linked to cladding. She shows more concern about the effects the Grenfell fire will have on her future business at Taylor Maxwell over any guilt or shame. Quote,
"But I also have to think about the implications of, Taylor Maxwell, how it will impact on them, if anything, because I've got to think of all of that."
Her excuse is she wasn't qualified to point out the dangers.
On what you knew from the UAE fire, the subject of Mr. Geeta's email, and indeed what you had already alerted Mr. Verley to in the previous week, why did you continue to offer Renebon 55 PE core as a standard in the UK market without at least some kind of warning about its fire performance?
I would have needed to have had a specific guidance from Merksheim to do any different.
Did you seek any such specific guidance from Merksheim?
I don't recall doing so.
You don't recall doing so. Does that mean you don't think you did so to the best of your recollection?
I can't recall.
Why did you not do so?
I don't know. As I say, I wouldn't have had the knowledge or the experience to have been able to challenge it in that way, and would have been waiting for guidance from Merksheim if they'd seen it was necessary.
The judge is like, wait, what?
Well, just help me. You might have said to Merksheim, should we still be offering PE as standard? Without expressing a view either way, but at least prompting them to consider the question.
And I don't recall whether I did or didn't, sir.
Right. Thank you.
You, in fact, would be supplying PE core for the Grenfell Tower project.
Yes.
And we've seen nothing to suggest that either CEP or Harley asked for FR, or that you volunteered FR as the core material for Renebon 55 for the Grenfell Tower project. Is that correct?
Yes, I don't recall any conversations about the core.
You say you don't recall any conversations about the core?
I don't recall conversations about the core.
And is it right that you were continuing to offer PE core as standard, and as we see here in respect of the Grenfell Tower project, notwithstanding the dangers that the fire in the UAE had shown you were present in the use of PE core on tall buildings?
Yes, I was.
Is there a reason why you didn't alert Jeff Blades or Harley when quoting for Renebon 55 PE for Grenfell about those dangers?
As I've explained before, unless I was getting a specific instruction from Merksheim to do differently, then I would have carried on as I was.
Even though you knew use of Renebon 55 PE core might present a risk to life and safety.
As I say, I didn't have the technical background to be able to make those decisions. That I would have been led by Merksheim as to whether the product was still suitable for the use.
The combustibility of the ACM panels was well known in the industry, particularly since mainstream news reports of what happened in Dubai. Even the guy that lived there, he knew, but she continued to sell it, and the facade company who installed it incorrectly, they knew, and even overcharged on it to make themselves a sneaky profit on the side. Arconic is essentially bankrupt due to all their legal costs, but still, the higher up the chain we go, the stronger the absolute refusal to see what is right in front of their faces, combined with an inability to think or speak. It causes death and cancer, but because it's legal, they think it's okay to carry on.
And in fact, do you accept that if the Grenfell Tower fire had never happened, nobody would ever have known about the failed test 5B?
Oui. Yes.
Do you accept that test 5B was Arconic's deadly secret?
Non. No.
Why not?
Pourquoi pas? Parce que encore une fois, le produit qui a été vendu n'est pas dangereux en soi.
Because once again, the product that was sold is not dangerous in itself.
Il comportait des risques qui ont été contrôlés de différentes manières en fonction des pays et des législations.
It did have some risks, but which were dealt with differently in different countries and according to legislation.
Et je ne veux pas faire d'exemple ou de parallèle avec d'autres produits qu'on utilise même tous les jours, mais il y a beaucoup de choses avec lesquelles on vit aujourd'hui qui comportent certains risques.
I won't give an example or parallel with other products that we use every day, but nevertheless there are many things that we do use every day which do give rise to certain risks.
There is a huge difference between certain risks and literally putting people's lives in danger. How these people were okay on using this product on buildings with such risk of fire makes no sense and should never have been allowed. But that point does not seem to be made at the inquiry. Arconic is still going strong. They've had a rebrand, and if you go to their website, there's a low budget production video which clearly states safety is a priority every day at Arconic. Nothing matters more. Well, that cannot be true, because if they cared about safety, they would not produce a toxic product. But come to find out, the hedge fund activist Paulsinger had a 10% stake in this company back in 2017, before the fire, making this a much bigger issue than either the Metropolitan Police or the British justice system could ever deal with, because this is how the global economy works. And Arconic, well, they were originally a manufacturer of aluminium. They've supplied aerospace and Boeing. And well, there's been a lot of aeroplane and rocket launch disasters. Obviously, making aluminium is not making them enough profit. And it's a pattern of producing unsustainable products in an unsustainable market to make profit for banks. Paulsinger makes money out of buying debt, and he uses very aggressive means to force companies into debt so he can break them up and sell them for profit. And what he does is not illegal. Most of the reporting on Grenfell Tower has been from a humanitarian perspective, but Paulsinger and banks have nothing to do with humanity. But this kind of information only gets discussed in financial publications. It's not part of the mainstream media. This article explains the power of activist shareholders whose investment money Paulsinger uses have successfully reshaped swathes of corporate America, some might say destroyed, and many politicians or even ex-prime ministers are directors or might even be investors in companies he owns. And so when you have inquiries and whistleblowers mysteriously commit suicide, that explains the caginess and reluctance to answer questions at these inquiries, which are paid for by public funds, and they cost millions when no lessons are ever learned. I made this video last year, but I've re-edited it to coincide with the release of the Netflix documentary. The last show I watched on Netflix was very disappointing, and I very much doubt if the true story behind the Grenfell disaster will be told, because it's an entertainment service that makes money out of people's trauma. And what's so sad is the people that lived there knew exactly what needed to be fixed and had communicated it and documented it clearly by their blog to make it safer, to make it a more comfortable place to live a normal life, and they never would have approved a flammable material to go on their house if they'd been given the choice. But instead, all these people's lives were lost, many people's lives were turned upside down, and nearly 10 years later they're still asking to be heard.
We stand together tonight to send the new government a message. Fix this broken country. Rebuild these broken systems. We demand justice. We demand change. We demand charges.